Hey everybody, it's Jay Glazer here, and we are back with another episode of Guidance by Glazer. And in the famous words of Ric Flair, woo! Or also our friend Eric Stam from a few weeks ago. Today we are super jazzed to be bringing you a very technical topic, but something that is super important if you are a buyer or a seller here in New York City. And that topic is that of land leases. I have done a ton of digging on this topic. I have a lot of things to share with you. You're going to want to buckle in for this one because it's going to be a very bumpy ride. We are going to be discussing what is a land lease, the pros and cons of a land lease, and just trying to wrap your head around exactly what land lease living in New York City is. It's something that comes up with almost every customer with whom we are working because they are everywhere and they're becoming more frequent in the city, and ultimately you're going to encounter them in your process, and you might want to understand exactly what they are and whether they are for you, more importantly. So just to get things clear, oftentimes I get asked, what is a land lease versus a ground lease? To start things off, a ground lease and a land lease are the exact same thing. Some people call it a ground lease, some people call it a land lease. We will call it a land lease for the purposes of this Guidance by Glazer. Thank you for joining us. So a land lease is essentially exactly as it sounds. It's a lease of the land underneath a building. What? What did I just say? You heard me correctly. A land lease is a lease under which a building sits. So that means if you are buying into a land lease, you are buying a building, an apartment within a building that has a separate owned entity underneath the land in which it sits. So in this instance, that means you as the shareholder, as the buyer and the owner of the apartment, are paying a separate rent to the landowner under the land. And oftentimes that means, as you'll see and we'll discuss, a higher monthly carrying cost on the apartment. So first and foremost, a land lease brings a totally new dynamic to ownership in this instance, because you are not just paying your maintenance to the building and your taxes to the city, you are also now involving a third party owner to whom you are paying a specific rent. That is essentially the definition of a land lease. So let's break it down a little. First and foremost, the genesis of this video is twofold. Both I think are important to discuss. The first is that we are actually currently about to go into contract today, knock on wood, on a land lease purchase with some buyers with whom we've been working for quite a while now. This is a very savvy buyer, and that's important to remember because land leases are complicated. Very savvy buyer who understood the pros and cons and the quote risk of a land lease and did the math, which we're going to break down a little bit, to determine that it was the right purchase for him and his family, because the immense amount of savings that he got on the purchase price offset the risk and higher costs of maintenance on the actual apartment. So as we said, the first most notable con, if you will, of a land lease is that the maintenance is typically higher. Because you are now paying this additional rent on a property, you find a higher monthly payment. Now, what is the offsetting factor of a higher monthly payment? Well, typically, land lease apartments tend to cost less than the comparable apartment next door or around the corner. Oftentimes, you can get savings of up to 25% or even 40%. There's some buildings that might even be 50% discounted. So ultimately, yes, you're paying a higher monthly number, but you are getting that discount baked into the purchase price. So depending on how you do your analysis, you're ultimately not necessarily losing because you are actually saving on the way in. So that's the pro of the con, meaning, you know, they offset each other. You have the higher monthly cost, but you have the higher yielded savings on the way in. So, woo! Oh my God, I was almost exposed here. Let's keep going. Do I need this? Yeah, I still need this. That was reason number one. As I said, we were working with a buyer. We are working with a buyer who's about to go into contract on one of these purchases. The second reason I wanted to talk about it today is because I actually left separate buyers this past weekend who made an offer on a different building downtown that has a land lease. And the reality is land leases are becoming more and more commonplace, and because they're more commonplace, they're becoming more and more comfortable to buyers, and there are more and more buildings popping up because land is rare in New York City, and oftentimes the developer has to partner or assign a lease with a land lease owner in order to develop a building. So buildings like 10 Bond Street, 100 Barrow Street, and 70 Charlton Street, which is the one we visited this past weekend, all have land leases on them, and they've all sold and done pretty well. So the reality is land leases are becoming more mainstream. Boys and girls, they are here to stay. So get comfortable, watch this video, listen to it, absorb this information, because when you're out there hunting, you want to consider this as an option. So that's something, that was the other reason why I wanted to discuss this with you today, is because they're becoming more common. They're real. They're not going anywhere. So get comfortable with them. Something that you would want to know, which we're going to talk about now with my esteemed notes, is there are 3 types of land leases in the city. And I think one of them is probably going to surprise you. There are land leases that are government-owned land. The biggest government-owned land lease in all of New York City is the entire neighborhood of Battery Park. Yes, I did just say that, and I'm going to repeat myself. Battery Park City, as a neighborhood, is entirely on a land lease owned by the government of New York State. Therefore, if you buy an apartment in Battery Park or you have an office in Battery Park, you are in some ways contributing to a land lease of the entire neighborhood. American Express, Goldman Sachs, countless other Fortune 500 companies have offices in Battery Park and clearly are not afraid of the land lease implications of that area. Therefore, they feel comfortable signing leases and having offices there. The second form of a land lease is in not-for-profit organizations. Despite the fact that they're not-for-profits, they earn a profit with the land lease because they are basically making money by leasing the land. Churches are a very common land lease owner. Churches own a lot of property in Manhattan, and they lease the land, obviously, to recoup funds for their various organizations. So, for example, this 100 Barrow Street that I brought up is owned by St. Luke's Church. Oftentimes, the land lease could be owned by Trinity Church, which is one of the most mega landlords in the city. In fact, Disney is uprooting themselves from the Upper West Side and going down to Hudson Square downtown on a $600 million acquisition that also has a land lease component to it. It's mind-blowing how these big corporations are absorbing this, quote, land lease risk and moving into land lease-owned buildings. And last but not least, and perhaps the one that invites the most concern, if you will, is a land lease owned by a private landlord. That means someone whose sole mission is to get as much money as possible from the tenants. Most land leases in New York City are privately owned. So the reality is, if you are venturing down the land lease path, you're going to find a privately owned land lease. And in fact, the deal that we have on the table now that we're about to consummate is with a land lease that is privately owned. So, if your mind isn't blown yet, it's going to be now. Let me go back to my notes. So what do you need to know else about land leases? For starters, a land lease is, since you are paying rent to a landlord, is a lease of typically around 99 or 150 years. These are not one-year leases. These are not two-year leases. These are very, very long leases. So when you're buying into a land lease building, you absolutely have to do a higher level of due diligence on the building. As you've heard me say on Guidance by Glazer, we always guide our clients to reviewing the building, making sure it's financially healthy, making sure it's structurally healthy, making sure there's no issues as it relates to banking. With a land lease purchase, you have to do even deeper analysis and research because you have to review the land lease. The reality is a 99-year land lease could be coming up for renewal. It could be coming up for escalations. It could have baked-in escalations that are alarming, and you want to do your homework on those. So what are some of the things that you want to look for? Well, as I just said, does the lease have 10 years on it? Does it have 20 years left on it? Does it have 50 years on it? If you have something that was just renewed for another 99 years, you know that at least those 99 years are most likely to some degree figured out and planned for. If you have a lease that's up for renewal in 10 years, you have to know as much as possible as to what's going to happen at that 10-year benchmark. Are they going to renew the lease? Is the lease going to just go exponentially through the roof in terms of the cost, and is that going to deteriorate value? So those are all some of the questions that you're going to want to research when you're buying in a land lease. The reality is the majority of the fear people have with land leases is this said uncertainty. There are a lot of built-in escalations that are based off percentages of land value as opposed to fixed amounts, and therefore it's a kind of evolving number as you go. And people don't like that sense of uncertainty. So we understand that by nature, a land lease purchase is going to have fewer purchasers desiring to buy in the building. One of the additional offsetting negative factors of a land lease is that banks, because of the escalating costs, are more reluctant to lend in certain land lease buildings, right? Their concern is getting their monthly payment every month, and if that monthly payment is now being pushed into a monthly payment of land lease, then they're not necessarily going to get their money. Therefore, they're going to have a problem. Therefore, they avoid that potential issue at all costs and don't underwrite a loan in the building. They pass, they decline. Therefore, some land lease buildings are harder to get a loan in, and as a result, they become more illiquid. So there's a lot at play and a lot to think about. But here's the reality. In our particular scenario that we are working with our buyer right now, if you analyze the savings of this apartment over the course of 10 years, I think you come up with a very, very surprising and pleasant result. So this is a beautiful apartment he's buying. It's a 3-bedroom, 3-bath, gut-renovated home, triple exposure, a lot of views, great location on the Upper East Side, washer, dryer, doorman building, all the bells and whistles. I estimate conservatively that over 10 years, I should say that conservatively that he's saving around $500,000 by not buying the equivalent apartment in a non-land lease building. If we break that $500,000 of savings over 10 years. So again, a lot of the analysis you want to do is how long do you anticipate owning the apartment? Over 10 years, he is saving $4,166 a month by not paying a higher purchase price in a non-land lease building. Now, I did different analysis, which is to say, let's assume that the maintenance is about $1,500 higher than it would be if it were not a land lease building. That's $1,500 over the first 3 years. Then I did $2,000 over the next 3 years, and then I did $2,500 over the last 4 years of this 10-year window we're looking at. So that means that you have a very aggressive escalating land lease over 10 years, right? I did not act conservatively in this analysis. If you add up those 10 years of additional cost, you have a total of $216,000 in additional costs on the land lease. I just said that you save $500,000 on the purchase price, but over 10 years, you're spending an additional $216,000. I don't really need to do the math right there. It speaks for volumes that the savings my buyer is getting coming into the land lease purchase over the course of 10 years is over $250,000, in fact, over $275,000 in savings. Yes, there is risk associated with this purchase, but the reality is that is incredibly well offset by the savings my buyer will inherit on this purchase. Another really, really important factor that I think is becoming more and more prevalent in today's marketplace is that you have rising carrying costs all over the city, in part due to highly amenitized buildings where you have to pay for your gym attendant, where you have to pay for your 18 doorman, your porter, your super, your lifeguard, right? I mean, you have to pay for your doggy daycare, all these crazy costs that are adding to your monthly expenses. In addition, you have rapidly increasing real estate taxes. The city does not tread lightly when it comes to real estate taxes. They go up substantially year after year. So the reality is, despite the fact that a land lease building might have higher carrying costs, they're becoming more and more in line with a standard building, a standard condo or co-op, than ever before. I'm working with clients who are looking at monthly costs and their minds are being blown at how high they are. So as land leases stabilize into normalcy with the rest of the market, you're getting a huge benefit in purchase price, but you're not really paying all that much more on a monthly carrying cost. My buyer and I were looking at apartments with higher monthly common charges and taxes in various buildings than the land lease amount he's going to be paying each month. So it was a no-brainer in many regards. So I think that if you're going to be considering purchasing in a land lease, there is without a doubt some risks associated with it. But I think the reality is most buyers don't take the time to really assess building by building and case by case whether it makes sense for them to consider a land lease. A lot of brokers don't take the time to really understand the pros and cons, and therefore they automatically write them off. And the same with attorneys. Their attorneys are paid to be cautious and conservative, which is hopefully what they do. That's great value. But so they're going to say, listen, land leases can be problematic. But in reality, as I just demonstrated, the savings can also be immense. So don't automatically write off a land lease. Do your homework, take the time to learn about them. As I said, they're here to stay, they're more commonplace, and they're more in line with other buildings in terms of monthly costs than they've ever been before. So that's our episode. I hope I brought you immense value. Please drop a heart, a like, a comment, an emoji, a gif, a spook, a wook, a luke into the comment section. As always, we'd love to connect with you on all of our platforms. You can find us on Facebook, Glazer Team. Feel free to like our page, subscribe to our newsletter, send us any comments, anything you want us to talk about. If you have a topic you want me to wax on about, I'll be happy to do so. This is completely unscripted, folks, and so we will just go after whatever topic you want to hear about. On Instagram, you can find us, The Glazer Team, and our website, our sparkling website, is glazerteam.com. And what's not on here is our YouTube channel, where you can find all of these videos. You can find it on our website, but you can also find it on our YouTube channel. And I believe that's Glazer Team or The Glazer Team, whatever. Just Google it, GTS. Thanks for joining us. Happy holidays, and we'll see you next week.